okay? So, because we have a lot of stuff to cover over the next 4 days, so I don't slow down very much. And I'm a fast talker, so if you don't catch something, we'll get questions, okay? But keep the questions relevant to the discussion so that we don't get off in a tangent somewhere else on something we're going to cover later anyway. I'll let you know. If you ask me a question, we're going to cover it later. I'll just say we're going to cover that later, okay? That way we don't get too far off track here. All right, first thing we want to talk about today that I want you guys to get familiar with, because everything we're going to talk about this weekend is going to revolve around two things, really. First thing it's going to revolve around is what I call the triangle of survivability. All right? The triangle of survivability revolves around one thing: core temperature control. If you can keep your body warm or keep your body cool, you can survive. If you can't do that, nothing else matters. Barring traumatic injury, that's the only thing you have to worry about. Now, if you got a compound fracture of the femur, you're probably not going to live anyway. But if you're in good health, the main things you have to worry about is controlling your body's core temperature to make sure you either stay warm enough or cool enough. Everything that we're going to talk about this weekend is going to revolve around that and nothing else. So everything that we're going to teach you is going to revolve around how to control your body's core temperature utilizing the resources that you have and the resources around you. There's three sides to the triangle of survivability: skills, knowledge, and resources. All right? Without one of these three, you cannot control your body's core temperature. Skill means that you have the ability, or you own the ability, to perform a certain task. That's a skill. If you don't own a certain skill and you can't perform it, obviously then you can't do it. So if it becomes a matter of, I've got to start a fire, and I don't own that skill, and I can't do it, in turn I can't control my body's core temperature, hence I'm dead. Knowledge. Knowledge encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses the things that create your skills. It also encompasses the things that are resources around you, your ability to utilize the resources around you, the resources in your kit, the ability to multi-function the things that are in your kit, which we're going to talk a lot about this weekend, and your ability to improvise on the fly. That's what your knowledge does for you. Resources are all the things around you, from the things that you carry on your back, to the knowledge you carry in your head, to the resources around you in the natural environment. If you don't have any resources, I don't care who you are, there's nothing you can do. If you walk out into an area and you get into an emergency situation and you have zero resources, and I mean nothing, there's nothing you can do. You're either going to get too hot or you're going to get too cold. You're going to die from hyperthermia or hypothermia, or shock brought on by one of the two, which are the main three things that kill people in emergency situations. You have to be able to control your body's core temperature, not to succumb to hyperthermia, hypothermia, or shock. All right? And the things that we're going to talk about are going to help you control that this weekend. So, the first thing we're going to discuss the 5 C's of survivability. There are several reasons that these 5 items were chosen. The main reason is that if you have these 5 items on your body all the time, and they're bulletproof, in other words, they're the best that money can buy, or they're not going to tear up, there's no way you can destroy them, then these 5 items will keep you alive in just about any situation that you can encounter, as long as you have the right 5 items. And that's what we're going to work on a lot this weekend. So let's go over these 5 items real quick, fast, and then we'll talk about them individually. We're going to talk a lot about them throughout this week. Cutting tool, combustion device, cover, which is a microclimate, includes the clothing on your back, which is your first element of cover. We'll cover that in a little while. Container, and cordage. These 5 items are in order of importance. Okay? If you don't have a cutting tool, it's very hard to create the other 4 items. All of these items, other 4 items, can be made from natural material. A cutting tool can be made from natural material, but it's not going to last. Okay, that's why they re-napped flint, because it didn't last. That's why they had to make new bone tools all the time. $20 sleeping bag. Because the knife is your most important thing. Now, do you have to spend $300 to get a good knife? Absolutely not. You can find great knives at rummage sales, at yard sales, at the Salvation Army, but you have to understand what makes a good cutting tool versus what doesn't, so that you know what you're looking for if you're looking for something on a discount. I have a $3 butcher knife that I would trust my life to every day of the week, but it took me a long time to find that knife. So you have to understand that. We're going to talk about each one of these elements and what makes them the right thing to carry of those 5 items. So it's very important to understand that. These 5 items also most directly affect your body's core temperature. Above and beyond anything else, these 5 items will control your body's core temperature. You have to be able to have that cutting tool to make fire. Fire controls body core temperature. You have to have a cutting tool to create good cover. Cover affects core temperature. You have to have a container to boil water in or to warm water, which again affects body core temperature. And it takes cordage to build a lot of these other things which directly affect your body's core temperature. So these 5 items are the most important items in your kit. If you have these 5, you're better off than most people are when they walk out in the woods every day. It doesn't take hardly any room to carry those 5 items. So now what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about each one of those items individually real quick, and we're going to talk about what makes a good one of these. Okay? You should be able to do at least 3 things. If it can't do 3 things, it's not worth carrying. Everything has to be multifunctional. If you have one item that will only perform one task, I guarantee you can find something else that will perform that task good enough, and something else, so you don't have to carry the one item that will only do one thing for you. Okay? And your cutting tool is exactly the same way. It has to be multifunctional. Now obviously, it can cut lots of different things. It can skin game, it can do all of that, so it's multifunctional, and that's still cutting. It has to be multifunctional as far as other things go to help you affect your survivability. So, the first element of a good cutting tool is size. Now, we're talking about knives. Okay, we're going to talk about other cutting tools in general. And if you have other cutting tools, then you can be a little bit more liberal with your knife. You could get a little bit cheaper knife. Maybe it's not full tang. Maybe it doesn't meet all the specs that Dave says it needs to meet. But if you've only got that one tool that's on your side, when you fall out of the canoe, that one better be bulletproof. That one better be the right one. Whatever else is in your pack as a backup tool, 2 is 1, 1 is none, that's fine. But the one that you have attached to your body better be the right one, because it may be all you're left with in an emergency situation. So, first of all, let's talk about size. 4.5 to 6 inches in length, and that's blade length. Okay? Why 4.5 to 6 inches? The reason for 4.5 to 6 inches is you're probably going to have to use that knife, if it's the only one you got, to process firewood at some point. If you can't break it, you can't get into it and break it by hand, snap it over a tree, snap it over your knee, you may have to process firewood. You may also have to cut something to build your shelter with. A 4-inch diameter tree is the biggest thing you should ever need to cut. A 4-inch diameter piece of hickory will make 4 pieces of firewood that burn for a long time if you split it 4 ways. A 4-inch log for a ridgepole on a shelter will hold up a massive amount of weight. You can stand on a 4-inch piece of log. 10 feet long, you're not going to break it if it's the right kind of wood and it's not dead. So 4 inches is the maximum size lumber you want to mess with, because you're always thinking about conserving calories, conserving energy, and conserving your hydration, because conservation of resources. And the reason they do that is because they don't want you to call them up crying that you have a blister on your thumb from using your knife. So they round it off to make it more comfortable for you. Okay? I'd rather have a blister than be dead because I couldn't use this knife to strike my ferro rod with. Alright? I'm not going to use the blade of my knife to strike a ferro rod if I don't have a striker. But if my back of my knife has got a 90-degree spine on it, I can do that. Now you can use glass, you can use flint, you can use a piece of metal you find in the woods. Anything that has a good, sharp, hard 90-degree edge on it will strike sparks off a ferrocerium rod. We'll talk about that when we get into that portion of the class. But just remember that you have to have a 90-degree spine on there to be able to throw good sparks off your ferro rod. The next thing is, it needs to be made out of a high carbon steel metal so that it will throw sparks on its own if you find a hard rock. If you don't have flint and steel with you, but you've already made one fire, and we'll talk about the next fire in this class, we'll talk about making char cloth and all that stuff, to help you affect your next fire, if you have a knife that's high carbon steel, you can hit the back of that knife with a hard rock like a piece of flint, and it will throw sparks. Okay? And that will ignite char cloth, or any highly combustible material that's been charred. We'll talk about that later in this class as well. So that knife has to be made out of a high carbon steel. High carbon steels are 1095, 01. Those are both good high carbon steels. 1075 is high carbon, but it's not really good enough to throw